my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm doing a long overdue book haul. Every time over the last month I felt like I'm ready to film this book haul, I just start pulling all of the books from like all of the places around my apartment that they had spread, getting like overwhelmed before all of the books were gathered, and then not filming it. This is a lot of books because this is a book haul that's going to cover the months of June 24 to January 25. Technically, this is kind of just June through December of 24 because I didn't actually get any books in January, but I'm including January just so that I know where this stops, that February is where my next book haul is going to begin. I'm not including February, even though we're like right at the end of February here, because I have bought one new book in February so far, but I'm not sure that I'm actually done buying books in February. Like, I might be buying more things right at the end of the month here. I have these books in some stacks of categories based on like when and how I acquired them and whether or not I've read them. This first stack of books is entirely a stack of books that I've already read. These are all of my pre-orders for June through December of 2024. 2024 was a year that I decided to pre-order more of my most anticipated releases than I would have in previous years, with the intention of reading them more or less as soon as they arrived, so that by the end of the year I'd have read like a chunk of my most anticipated 2024 releases and I would have favorites of the year. It didn't quite work out that way for me because a lot of these books, everything I pre-order, I think is something that could be a 5-star read for me, and most of these under-delivered like just a little bit. I actually have plans to film a whole video about this, about my 2024 pre-orders, why those were my pre-orders of the year, and like what happened and how I plan to correct course in 2025. That's a whole video that's in the works. So right now I'm just going to plow through this list of books, tell you what the book is, tell you what I rated it. Running Close to the Wind by Alexandra Rowland, 4 stars. Rakesfall by Vajra Chandrasekera, 3 stars. A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher, 4 stars. Long Live Evil by Rees Brennan, 4 stars. The Wood at Midwinter, very short story, so like barely a book, but 4 stars. And then finally, The City in Glass by Nghi, 5 stars. Thank goodness. This is what I was waiting for. This is what I was hoping for from every one of these books. Near the end of the year, though, I was starting to realize that my pre-orders, my very most anticipated books, were not hitting quite like I wanted them to, and I started buying some other 2024 releases so that I would have things to read that I would hopefully want to nominate for Hugo Awards and such. Some others that I bought and then read pretty soon after I bought them were The Transitive Properties of Cheese by Anne Leblanc. This is a neon hemlock novella, 4 stars. Yes, this book has a cheese heist, but I think it's also much more serious science fiction than you would possibly expect from that description, and also the sort of like bright, vibrant color. I think this is kind of presenting it as a sillier book than it is. I do think this has some like deep, meaty science fiction ideas in it. A Letter to the Luminous Deep by Sylvie Cathrall, first in a duology. The second book is coming out this year, and this is cozy, epistolary puzzle box fantasy. 4 stars. This is also a debut. And then The Briar Book of the Dead by A.G. Slatter. This is one of the novels in her Sourdough universe. 4 stars. I actually think this has been my favorite of the Sourdough universe novels so far. I haven't read The Crimson Road yet, which is the one that just came out. I haven't even bought it yet. But having just read this and liked it as much as I did, I am now like way more excited for The Crimson Road. This one is witchy and it has a strong connection to her previous novella of Sorrow and Such, which was published under the Angela Slater name. This takes place several generations later, though, and you don't need to read the novella first in order to, fully appreciate this book. And then another 2024 release that I bought near the end of the year that I am currently reading right now is The Practice, the Horizon, and the Chain by Sofia Samatar. This is a novella, and it is science fiction, pretty deeply dystopian, I would say. I'm very intrigued by the beginning of this. I will probably finish this very quickly. The next stack of books I have are things that I bought on my Worldcon UK trip, which was included stops in Edinburgh, Glasgow for the convention, and then London afterwards. So I was in the UK for like 2 weeks. I came home with like a suitcase full of books. I didn't get these all at the same place. I acquired them over the course of the trip from various places, but one of my goals of this trip was to get the UK editions of the Wayfarers series by Becky Chambers. I read these as they were released in the US, but I got them from the library because I don't like the US covers and I didn't want to own them. If you're unfamiliar with these series, they are science fiction companion novels. A lot of people describe them as cozy. I think each of them has subject matter in them that goes heavier than just plain cozy. I think if you want just plain cozy Becky Chambers, the Monk and Robot books are the one to go for. But these are all very character driven and they don't rely heavily on action, which is kind of unusual for a big, like, galaxy spanning space opera universe. The first book is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. You should read this one first. All of the others are sort of completely independent companion sequels to this one. So this one comes first and then you can read the next three in any order. A Closed and Common Orbit is the second in publication order. Record of a Spaceborne Few is the third, and The Galaxy and the Ground Within is the fourth. And then I have three more books that I bought at the convention from vendors in the dealer's room. The first is The Fox's Tower and Other Tales by Yoon Lee, which is a collection of whimsical flash fiction. I have read this one already. I gave it 3 stars. I liked the vibe of this, but the stories themselves were very repetitive after a point. Also, I liked the idea that this was illustrated and was disappointed to realize as I was reading it that the illustrations were all stock images, not original to the collection. These stories are mostly fantasy with a little bit of science fiction, but there's a lot of like wild, imaginative fantasy stuff in here, and all of the illustrations that have been chosen are very mundane, like real-world animals and landscapes, and it just didn't seem to fit to me. That said, independently, most of these short stories were things that I would otherwise like. So mixed bag with this collection. I did buddy read this with my friend Joe at Final Blow Joe. And then the other two I haven't read yet. The first is The Hands of the Emperor by Victoria Goddard, which is intensely chunky and also has tiny text, and I cannot wait to read this. I am so looking forward to this. I have enjoyed other shorter things by Victoria Goddard. I've read the first 2 Greenwing and Dark books and I liked them very much. However, most of her books take place in like an interconnected multiverse and they all relate to each other, and it's this big whole thing, and this is supposed to be the best entry point, so like I know I started in the wrong place. I'm gonna probably make myself read this before I can keep going with the Greenwing and Dark books. I think that's for the best. And then I went a little bit crazy out on a limb and I bought the fancy schmancy Illumicrate edition of Goddess of the River by Vaishnavi Patel. This is her sophomore novel. I haven't read her first book, but I think they're both total standalones. I think I'm going to start here. This is very pretty. This is a book that I was already very interested in. I've wanted to read something of hers since her first book came out. And not only does this edition have the fancy, artsy sprayed edges, but it also has art on the end pages, and it has This is very pretty front cover of the naked hardback. It's very interesting that before this book, this is actually the first book I have ever purchased with sprayed edges. I did not own a single sprayed edges book anywhere in my collection. And it wasn't that I was particularly avoiding sprayed edges on purpose. It was just that this is a treatment that I think until very recently, the sorts of books that I've been interested in haven't been getting. And after buying this, there are going to be 3 more books in this book haul with sprayed edges, and not fancy special editions. I think all 3 of those are just books where like the first edition comes with sprayed edges. And in a span of months over the course of 2024, I have now gone from a person who owned 0 sprayed edges books to one who now owns 4. 4! The rest of the things from my UK trip are a mix of books that I got either at used bookstores or from the freebies table at the convention, which was very well stocked on the first day, and then people just like plundered it, and I am maybe a little guilty of plundering it as well, but I did not plunder it nearly as much as I saw some other people doing. And I don't know if the copies of books that I got there were new or used. I suspect a couple of them are secondhand copies. One of those is A Fistful of Sky by Nina Kiriki Hoffman. This is a mass market paperback edition. This author has written some short fiction. In particular, I remember reading a story of hers in an anthology like years ago that I really liked. It really stood out to me. And this is probably her best known work, novel, ? And this is something that like years ago, back when I actually cared about like the Goodreads recommendation algorithm because I thought it was recommending me good books. Was it actually? I don't know. Has it gotten worse? Maybe. I don't know. But back when I trusted the Goodreads recommendation algorithm in my younger years on the book internet, this is a book that it recommended to me a lot, so I recognize it. But this is a contemporary fantasy novel about a girl who's grown up in a magical family. It was published in, I think in 2002. So this is just one of those kind of older books that's been on my radar that if I see a copy of it, I wanted to grab it for years now, and I finally have a copy. Another one that I know is a used copy. This is Ash by Malinda Lo. This is another book that I've just had on my radar for like, if I have an opportunity to grab this at some point, I wanted to grab it. This is a sapphic YA Cinderella retelling from, gosh, what year was this published? 2009. So this has been around like since I was a teenager. I've been aware of this for a long time, and it's just one of those books that I feel like I'm missing out on my like history of fairy tale retellings because I haven't read it. So I don't know when I'll make time to read this, but I'm glad that I now have it on my TBR shelves. 2 more that are slightly more recent. This is a short story collection. It's Ambiguity, Machines and Other Stories by Vandana Singh. This was published in 2018, and I know my friend Rachel at Kalinati really loved this collection, so I've been curious about it since I saw her review way back when. And then Blackwater Sister by Zen Cho from 2021. This is the UK cover, which I really like. I like these colors. I have had this out from the library at times and had to return it unread. I like Zen Cho's fantasy writing, and this is a book of hers that I have wanted to read since it was released. So those were my UK trip books. I have, over the course of the months in this book haul, been to Seattle twice, and both times I did buy books. 4 of them are used books. I love used book shopping in the Seattle area because the bookstores there just have better SFF sections. I seem to always have great luck used book shopping when I'm in the Seattle area. So these books are, I got a couple of fairly recent releases here. The Ministry of Time by Kayleen Bradley, which was a 2024 release. This is something that I've seen get a huge amount of buzz, a lot of it positive, some of it negative from like a wide variety of sources. This is science fiction, but I know it was published as more like literary or general fiction. It also has a romance in it that people feel any number of different ways about. Basically, I've just seen a lot of discussion on this book, and it makes me curious if it might end up on awards shortlists this year. I got The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshni Chokshi. I think this was her adult debut. This is another one that was published by like a general fiction imprint, so when this was released, I was initially not sure if this was going to be actual fantasy from the description, or if it was just going to be the sort of book that was referencing a lot of fairy tales and stuff. But was gonna keep you guessing about like whether there's real magic or not. I've since seen this on enough fantasy lists that I'm pretty sure it's actually fantasy, and I've seen enough reviews of it for me to feel like even if it isn't very fantasy, there's still a good chance I'll like this. I bought it back in September with the thought that this would be a good spooky season read, and then I did not read it during spooky season, but maybe next spooky season. And then I got a copy of These Burning Stars by Bethany Jacobs. This is a book that I've seen hyped a lot on TikTok as just like a really good, fun space opera adventure. This was, I think, a debut, and it's the first book in what's going to be a trilogy. There are 2 books out now. This and Ministry of Time. Hold up, let me grab it. These are both books that I'm thinking I might, depending on how I'm feeling in the next couple weeks, as I'm cramming for Hugo Awards nomination reading, have on the list of things I might pick up if the mood strikes. This because this is potentially an option for Best Novel, and this because Bethany Jacobs is in her 2nd year of eligibility for the Astounding Award. And I haven't read a lot of new writers recently who are eligible for the Astounding Award this year. But there are a bunch more books later in this book haul that are also in this same category of things that are options for me to read in the next 2 weeks before Hugo nominations close, so take that all with a grain of salt. The last used book that I got in Seattle was the new Tor.com edition of City of Bones by Martha Wells. This is the one of these new editions of her backlist books that I didn't buy when it came out, because this one honestly is not high on my list of books of hers that I want to read. I have the old editions of a number of her books, and I have the Book of Ilrien bind up. This one is lower priority for me, but for used book prices, I definitely wanted to nab it. And then the second time I was in Seattle for Christmas, I also stopped in at Elliott Bay Book Company, which is one of my favorite bookstores in Seattle. They have a really good selection, including a bunch of small press titles in the science fiction and fantasy section. It always strikes me as just an incredibly well curated SFF section. I had like 10 minutes in that store total before I was due to be somewhere else. And I walked out of that store with 2 books. If I had had longer in there, I would have come out with more books. The first one that I got is The Annual Migration of Clouds by Premi Mohammed. I know this is science fiction. It's climate fiction. There is a sequel to this that came out this year, and I've heard really good things about both books. These are from a small press that I otherwise don't know anything about. I haven't read any of their other books. It's ECW Press. I've read The Butcher of the Forest, which is one of her novellas that came out last year in 2024, and I definitely want to read more of her work. And then I also got this copy of Jamaica Ginger and Other Concoctions by Nalo Hopkinson, which is her new short story collection. I don't think anything published in this is original to this collection. I think it's all previously published short fiction. I hadn't read anything of Nalo Hopkinson's before, but she also had a novel that came out late last year called Blackheart Man that I've just started listening to on audiobook on a whim. And I don't know if it's gonna work for me in audio format. The narration is great, but it's very dense. And I don't focus the best on like dense books in audio format. So I don't know if I'll continue with that on audio. But my idea when I bought this was that since I hadn't read anything of hers before, and she's a very acclaimed author, that reading a story collection would be a good way to sample the range of her work and have a better idea of what else of hers I might want to read in the future. And then my last travel trip where I came home with books was a very quick, like 2-night trip to Minneapolis. I was there for a baby shower, and my friend Bree of Bree Reads Books came and grabbed me on the day I was flying home and brought me to Uncle Hugo's. And I bought 3 books. I would have bought more than 3, except I was traveling carry-on with like a tiny overnight bag, and everything I bought had to fit in my purse, my shoulder bag. So I only bought 3 books. Very restrained of me. These are all used books. The first is Dream Hunter by Elizabeth Knox. This is the first book in a YA duology that I know was around when I was a teenager. Let's see what the publication date. 2005 is the publication date on this. Okay. When I was a teenager, my high school library had, I guess, only the second book in this series, and so I picked it up and read it thinking it was a standalone. I was deeply, deeply confused, and I have been curious about what the heck was actually going on in this series ever since. And so again, this is one of those like older titles that I have kind of had half an eye out for in used bookstores for years. And then the others, also things I've kind of had my eye out in used bookstores for years. These go together. These are The Sorceress and the Signet, and The Signet and the Firebird, both by Patricia A. McKillop. These are a duology. I think this is the first one and this is the second one. I might be wrong. I'm not going to stop and check that right now. I'm so close to the end of this video. Maybe not. I'm getting close-ish to the end of this video. I'm getting tired of filming, that's what I am. But these are among the books of hers that I don't yet own. The list of books of hers that I don't yet own is getting pretty small. And these are gorgeous matching hardcovers. Next, books I received as gifts for Christmas. There are 4 of these, and they're all maybe going to seem a little random to the average viewer of my channel. We'll see. First, I have an aunt who is a science fiction writer, and she gave me a copy of her second self-published novel, My New Best Friend is an Alien. The first book in this series is called Some of My Best Friends Are Human. The author is Liz J. Anderson. Full disclosure, as I said, she is my aunt. These are kind of retro-feeling YA-ish science fiction. She has several previously published short stories following the same protagonist as these books, but like later in that character's life, and then these are like the stories of this character's early years. I will need to reread the first book before I read this one. I read a version of that book before it was published, and I know that like I gave some feedback on that version, and maybe some other people did too, and I know that there were more edits between the time when I read it and when she self-published it. So I need to reread book 1 before I can read this. And then she also gave me 2 books that I had never heard of before. Both are science fiction. I think these are, one of them is book 1 and one of them is book 2 in a series, and I don't remember which is which. They're both by Jerry Oltion, and one of them is Anywhere But Here, and the other is The Getaway Special. The Getaway Special is from 2001, and Anywhere But Here is from 2005, so I believe that must be the reading order. These are ex-library copies. I know they're, you know, space travel science fiction, and that is all I know about them. And then I have a different family member who gave me a book that it's totally different from those. This is The Book of Tea by Okakura Kakuzo, with an introduction by Bruce Richardson. The original work here is from like 1906, and it is a very short work on the subject of traditional Japanese tea culture. And then this edition is like 50% introduction and afterward, like contextualizing that original work. I read very little nonfiction, but something like this is probably the type of nonfiction that I could very easily see myself reading. It's not too long, and it's subject matter that I find interesting from, you know, both a historical standpoint and I like tea standpoint, and a cultural context, all of that. Very interesting to me. And then I have one last big stack of books. This is the one that contains all 3 of those other sprayed edge editions that I was referring to earlier. I got a Barnes & Noble gift card for Christmas and I went crazy with it. Not only did I go crazy with the Barnes & Noble gift card, I also like bought some other things beyond the amount that was on the gift card. Basically for the Barnes & Noble after Christmas sales, there were both like online 50% discounts on like a particular selection of hardcover books, and then in stores it was like 25% off all other hardcovers. I did both things. I ordered a bunch of the 50% off books online, and then I also went into a store and bought, I think, 3 more, and I'm forgetting which ones of these were which, but most of these are 2024 releases. Well, all of them except like one exception, which is still sort of a 2024 release. So these are all also on the list of things that I could read in the next 2 weeks if I wanted to be really ambitious in trying to squeeze in things for Hugo nominations. That's where I am. That's the panic reading. That's what's going on. You may remember I did say that I am currently reading The Practice, The Horizon, and The Chain, listening to Blackheart Man on audio, and I also have 2 ebooks going right now. This is where we are. So the 2 that I'm thinking I'm kind of prioritizing for Hugo reading are The West Passage by Jared Pikacek and Metal from Heaven by August Clarke, for 2 very different reasons. The West Passage is a debut, therefore the author is eligible for the Astounding Award. I've had this strongly recommended to me in particular by people who know my reading taste, because this is supposedly a very weird medievalish fantasy with some very strange elements. It sounds very intriguing. And then Metal from Heaven is one that came out later in the year, and this has just had such strong buzz from a lot of people I kind of trust across different reviewing platforms. I expect this to be a more intense, heavy-hitting story, the sort of thing that I might want to consider for awards nominations. And then I have Space Oddity by Catherine M. Valenti, which is the sequel to Space Opera, which was a Hugo nominee, so like maybe I should be reading this. I don't know, this feels like not my priority right now, but maybe it should be. Let me know if you think it should be. And then it also feels like these two fantasy romances from Bramble should maybe not be my priority during Hugo nomination reading weeks, but these are The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst with purple edges, and Sword Crossed by Freya Marsk with red edges. I will say, if I hit like a reading slump, these are both the sort of books that I think could maybe yank me out of that. Next is the only novella in this stack. It is The Tusks of Extinction by Ray Naylor. This is science fiction. It has something to do with mammoths. I was recently talking to friends on a live stream who were saying good things about this. And then the last book I have is the one that is not technically a 2024 release because this was self-published in 2023. It's only the traditionally published edition that came out in 2024, and this is Blood Over Bright Haven by M.L. Wong. M.L. Wong is an author who I have been convinced by my TikTok For You feed that I need to be reading. She wrote Sword of Kaigen, and then this is her second novel, and I have been influenced. I believe she is a fantasy author I need to be reading. This, though, is not going to be happening right away because it's not Hugo eligible, having been first published in 2023, but this is the third book with the sprayed edges. Suddenly I have all these sprayed edges books. Anyways, thank you for sticking with me through to the end of this increasingly delirious book haul as I try to squeeze little bits of battery juice out of several dead camera batteries to get it finished. I also had to like put the camera in the fridge when it overheated. It's now very late at night and I'm not editing this until the morning. I hope you're having a very nice day. That is all. Bye for now.